The glass shattered on the floor, before Layla even understood what had happened. 1 second she was carrying a tray of drinks toward the private back room, and the next second, a heavy hand had knocked it clean out of her grip, sending it crashing down in front of 6 men, who all turned to stare at her like she was the one who had done something wrong. The man who knocked it away did not even look at her. He was already laughing, saying something to the men beside him in Arabic, his voice smooth and mocking, like he was performing for an audience. His name was Rami Nassar, and everyone in this part of the city knew exactly who he was. People lowered their eyes when he walked in. Waiters rushed to serve him first. Restaurant owners gave him the best table without being asked. He did not need to raise his voice to make a room go quiet. He only needed to exist in it. Layla knelt down and began picking up the broken glass, her fingers moving quickly, carefully, while her face stayed calm. Around her, the men kept talking, switching between low laughter and quick words in Arabic, clearly enjoying themselves at her expense. They thought she could not understand a single word. "Look at her," Rami said in Arabic, tilting his head toward her like she was an object on display, rather than a person doing her job. "She looks so tired. Maybe she thinks this job makes her important. A waitress serving men who could buy this entire restaurant without blinking." One of his men, a broad-shouldered man named Victor, chuckled and added something about how she probably could not even afford her own uniform. Another man, thinner and quieter, just smiled the way people smile when they want to be seen agreeing with someone powerful. Layla stood up slowly, the broken glass now resting safely on her tray. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the effort of staying calm. She had grown up speaking Arabic at home with her parents before they moved abroad when she was a child. She had spent years in another country, blending 2 worlds together, and while her accent had softened over time, her understanding of the language had never left her. Every insult Rami had just thrown at her, she had heard clearly, word for word. She could have stayed silent. She could have walked away, delivered the tray to the kitchen, and let the moment pass like water down a drain. That would have been the safe thing to do. Everyone in this city knew that men like Rami Nassar did not get challenged. They got obeyed. But something in her refused to let it go. She turned back to face him, her eyes steady, and spoke to him in Arabic, her voice calm and clear enough that his laughter died out almost instantly. "I understood everything you said," she told him. Every word. The room went silent, in a way that felt heavier than any noise could have been. Victor stopped mid-laugh, his mouth still open. The quiet man beside Rami sat up straighter, his eyes darting between Layla and his boss, waiting to see which way this moment would break. Rami's expression shifted, though not into anger, not yet. It shifted into something closer to surprise, the look of a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was not as solid as he believed. "You speak Arabic," he said slowly, testing the words like he was trying to decide if he had heard her correctly. "I do," Layla said, "and I heard you mock me because you thought I could not understand you. You laughed at me in front of your men, because you assumed I was too small to notice, too invisible to matter, but I noticed everything." A tense silence stretched across the room. One of the younger men shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable, unsure whether he should step in to defend his boss or stay out of it entirely. Nobody moved to stop her from speaking. Nobody dared to. Rami leaned back in his chair, studying her, the way a man studies an opponent he did not expect to find in a place like this. "You have some nerve," he said, his voice quieter now, almost curious. "Most people who work here would apologize just for existing near me." "I am not apologizing," Layla said. "I did nothing wrong. You did." The words landed heavier than she expected them to, heavier even than she intended. She watched his jaw tighten, the muscles along his neck flexing, as he processed what she had just said to him in front of his own men. This was not how anyone spoke to Rami Nassar, not in restaurants, not in boardrooms, not anywhere in this city. "You think insulting people who cannot fight back makes you powerful," Layla continued, her voice steady despite the tremor she could feel building somewhere deep beneath her calm exterior. "It does not. It only shows how afraid you are of being seen as anything less than powerful. A man who needs to mock a stranger just to feel important is not strong. He is a coward, hiding behind people who are too scared to tell him the truth." The word coward seemed to echo through the room longer than it should have. Victor's eyes widened. The quiet man beside Rami actually leaned back slightly, as if trying to put distance between himself and whatever was about to happen next. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Layla stood there with her tray held steady in both hands, refusing to let her fingers shake, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. Rami's eyes never left hers. He was studying her, searching her face for something, though she could not tell what. Fear, maybe. Regret. Some sign that she was about to break down and apologize the way everyone else always did. She gave him none of that. Instead, she held his gaze, refusing to look away first, refusing to let the silence push her into surrendering. Finally, Rami let out a short breath that was almost a laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, his voice low. "I know exactly who you are," Layla answered. "That does not change what you did tonight." Somewhere behind her, she heard the kitchen door creak open, and she caught a glimpse of her manager, a nervous man named Daniel, peeking out to see what all the silence in the private room meant. His face went pale the moment he saw who was seated at the table and how close Layla was standing to him. He immediately stepped back through the door, clearly too afraid to intervene, leaving Layla completely alone in the moment she had created for herself. Rami noticed the movement too, his eyes flicking briefly toward the kitchen door, before returning to Layla. A slow, unreadable expression crossed his face. "You have courage," he said finally. "I will give you that. Most people would already be begging for their job right now." "I am not begging," Layla said. "If speaking the truth costs me this job, then it costs me this job. But I will not stand here and let you mock me in a language you assumed I could not understand." Rami tilted his head, something flickering behind his eyes that looked almost like curiosity. It was the same look a person gives when they encounter something rare, something they had assumed did not exist anymore. "Leave us," he said suddenly, waving a hand toward his men without breaking eye contact with Layla. Victor blinked, clearly confused. "Boss?" "I said leave us," Rami repeated, his voice sharper this time. The men exchanged uneasy glances before rising from their seats one by one, filing out of the private room with quick, uncertain steps. Within moments, it was only Layla and Rami left in the space, the broken glass still scattered faintly near her shoes, the tray trembling slightly in her hands, despite her best effort to keep it steady. "Sit down," Rami said, gesturing to the empty seat across from him. "I am working," Layla said. "I do not have time to sit with you." "I am not asking as a customer," he said. "I am asking because I want to understand something." Layla hesitated. Every instinct told her to walk away, to disappear into the kitchen and let this strange, dangerous moment end on its own. But something about the way he was looking at her, not with anger, not with the usual arrogance, but with something closer to genuine confusion, made her pause. She set the tray down on a nearby table and sat, keeping her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap. "Why did you say what you said?" Rami asked. "Not the insult. I know why I said that. I want to know why you answered back. Everyone else in this city stays silent around me." "Why did you not?" Layla considered the question carefully before answering. "Because silence would have meant agreeing with you," she said. "And I do not agree that people without power deserve to be mocked by people who have it. My job does not define whether I deserve respect. Neither does yours." Something shifted in Rami's expression, a flicker of surprise quickly hidden behind a more neutral mask. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "You are not afraid of me," he said. It was not a question. "I did not say that," Layla replied honestly. "I am afraid. Everyone in this city is afraid of you. But being afraid does not mean I have to stay silent when something is wrong." For a moment, Rami said nothing. He simply studied her, the way someone studies a puzzle they had not expected to encounter that day. Outside the private room, the restaurant continued its normal rhythm, forks clinking against plates, quiet conversations, the occasional burst of laughter from other tables. But inside this room, time seemed to have slowed down into something heavier, something neither of them fully understood yet. "What is your name?" he asked finally. "Layla," she said. "Layla," he repeated, as if testing how the name sounded out loud. "You know, Most people who work here do not even introduce themselves to me. They are too busy trying to disappear. I am not most people, Layla said simply. Rami almost smiled at that, though he caught himself before it fully formed. He leaned back in his chair again, running a hand along his jaw as he considered her. You should be careful, he said, his tone shifting slightly. Quieter now, almost a warning delivered without malice. Not everyone who hears someone speak to me the way you just did will let it go as easily as I am choosing to. Is that a threat? Layla asked, her voice steady despite the tightening in her chest. No, Rami said. It is advice. There is a difference. Layla studied him for a long moment, trying to understand what kind of man could switch so quickly from mockery to something that almost resembled respect. She did not trust it. She had heard enough stories about Rami Nassar to know that trusting him could be the most dangerous decision anyone in this city could make. But there was something in the way he looked at her now, something quieter than the arrogance he had shown just minutes earlier, that made her wonder if she had glimpsed a version of him that very few people ever saw. I need to get back to work, she said finally, rising from her seat. Rami nodded, though his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. Of course, he said. Thank you for the drinks, Layla, and for the honesty. She did not respond to that. Instead, she picked up her tray and walked out of the private room, her steps measured, her back straight, refusing to let him see even a trace of how shaken she still felt inside. The moment she stepped into the kitchen, Daniel rushed toward her, his face pale with worry. What happened in there? He whispered urgently. Are you all right? I saw him send his men out. I thought something terrible was about to happen. I am fine, Layla said, though her hands were still trembling slightly as she set the tray down on the counter. Fine? Daniel repeated, his voice rising slightly in disbelief. Layla, that is Rami Nassar. Do you understand who that is? People do not talk back to him. People do not even look at him the wrong way. I know who he is, Layla said quietly. But he was wrong, Daniel. He mocked me in front of his men because he assumed I could not understand him. I was not going to let that go unanswered. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, clearly torn between admiration and terror. You are either the bravest person I have ever met, he said, or the most reckless. Maybe both, Layla admitted, allowing herself a small, tired smile. Before returning to her tables, Layla stopped in the small hallway behind the kitchen to steady her breathing, pressing her palm flat against the cool wall. Her reflection in the narrow mirror beside the coat rack looked calmer than she felt, and she studied it for a moment, trying to convince herself that the woman staring back had truly just done what she remembered doing. Grace found her there a few minutes later, carrying an empty tray toward the dish station. She stopped the moment she saw Layla's face. You look like you have seen something impossible, Grace said. I think I might have, Layla admitted. What happened back there? Grace asked, glancing toward the private room. The whole kitchen heard it go silent. Even the cooks stopped talking. Layla exhaled slowly. He was making fun of me, she said. In Arabic. He did not think I would understand. Grace's eyes widened. And you understood every word. Every word, Layla confirmed. What did you do? I told him the truth, Layla said simply. Grace stared at her for a long moment, clearly torn between admiration and alarm. Layla, do you know what that man could do if he wanted to? Not just to you, to this restaurant, to Daniel, to Harold. I know, Layla said quietly. I thought about all of that while I was standing there, and I said it anyway. Grace shook her head slowly, though a small, disbelieving smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. You are either the bravest woman I know, or you have officially lost your mind. Maybe both, Layla said, echoing the same words she would later say to Daniel, though she did not know that yet. She returned to the floor a few minutes later, forcing herself to focus on the ordinary rhythm of her job, refilling water glasses, taking orders from a young couple near the window, clearing plates from a table of businessmen discussing something in low, hurried voices. Each small task gave her mind something else to hold on to besides the replay of Rami's face when she had called him a coward. Near the end of her shift, she noticed one of Rami's men, the quiet one who had sat beside him during the confrontation, lingering near the entrance long after the others had already left. He watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable, before finally turning and disappearing into the night without a word. Layla felt a small chill settle over her at the sight, though she told herself it likely meant nothing, that perhaps he had simply forgotten something inside. For the rest of her shift, Layla moved through the restaurant with an unusual quiet steadiness, her mind replaying the conversation over and over, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had expected anger. She had expected to be thrown out, or worse, to face consequences that extended far beyond just losing her job. Instead, she had found herself sitting across from one of the most feared men in the city, answering his questions as if they were simply two strangers having an unexpected conversation. She glanced toward the private room one final time before her shift ended, catching a glimpse of Rami still seated at the table, his men having returned, but keeping a respectful distance now, speaking in hushed tones among themselves. He was staring at nothing in particular, lost in thought, his fingers tapping slowly against the wooden table. Layla did not know what tonight meant. She did not know if this was the end of the encounter or only the beginning of something far more complicated. But as she untied her apron and prepared to head home, one thought settled firmly in her mind, refusing to be shaken loose. She had spoken the truth to a man who terrified an entire city, and for the first time in a long while, she did not regret a single word of it. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin as she walked toward the bus stop, her mind still racing with everything that had happened. She thought of her younger brother, Noah, waiting for her at home, unaware of the storm his sister had just walked through. She thought of the bills piling up on their kitchen table, the quiet worry that had become a permanent resident in her chest ever since his diagnosis. She thought of how close she had come tonight, to losing the only steady income keeping them afloat. But mostly, she thought of the look on Rami Nassar's face when she had refused to back down. Not anger, not the fury she had expected, something closer to surprise, and beneath that surprise, something that looked almost like respect. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. She did not know if Rami would return to the restaurant seeking revenge, or if tonight would simply fade into memory, a strange encounter never to be repeated. But as she boarded the bus and watched the city lights blur past the window, she felt something she had not expected to feel after everything that happened. She felt, for the first time in a long time, like she had stood up for herself in a way that mattered. The bus rattled along familiar streets, carrying her closer to home, closer to Noah, closer to the life she had built out of long shifts and quiet resilience. She did not know yet that tonight was only the beginning of something much larger, something that would test her courage far beyond a single conversation in a private dining room. She did not know that Rami Nassar rarely forgot people who surprised him, and that surprise, in his world, often led to consequences nobody could predict. For now, she simply closed her eyes, let out a long breath, and allowed herself a small measure of peace, unaware of how much her life was about to change. The following morning, Layla woke to the sound of her phone buzzing against the nightstand, and for a brief, disoriented moment, she forgot everything that had happened the night before. Then the memory returned all at once, sharp and vivid, and she sat up quickly, her heart already racing before she had even checked the screen. It was a message from Daniel. "Come in early today. Something is happening." She stared at the message for a long moment, her stomach tightening with a familiar dread. She had spent half the night convincing herself that nothing more would come of the encounter with Rami Nassar, that he had simply been intrigued for a moment, and would forget about her entirely by morning. Men like him did not chase down waitresses who spoke their minds. They moved on to bigger concerns, bigger enemies, bigger battles. But something is happening did not sound like nothing. She got dressed quickly, checked on Noah, who was still asleep in his room, his breathing slow and steady, a small comfort in the middle of her growing unease, and left the apartment before the sun had fully risen over the city skyline. When she arrived at the restaurant, Daniel was already waiting near the entrance, pacing back and forth with his hands buried deep in his pockets. The moment he saw her, he rushed toward her, his face pale and tight with worry. "What is it?" Layla asked immediately. "What happened?" "He called this morning," Daniel said, his voice hushed even though the restaurant was still empty. "Rami Nassar. He called the restaurant directly and asked to speak with the owner." Layla felt her stomach drop. "About what?" "I do not know. Daniel admitted. The owner would not tell me the details. He just came out of his office looking like he had seen a ghost and told me to make sure you were here early today. Layla's mind raced through every possible outcome, each one worse than the last. Perhaps Rami wanted her fired. Perhaps he wanted something far more serious, some kind of punishment delivered through the restaurant to avoid getting his own hands involved. She thought of Noah, of the rent due at the end of the month, of the fragile stability she had worked so hard to build, and felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. Layla? She turned to find the restaurant owner, a tired-looking man named Harold, standing in the doorway of his small office, gesturing for her to come inside. Daniel gave her a look of nervous encouragement, though his eyes betrayed just as much fear as her own. She stepped into the office, and Harold closed the door behind her, his expression unreadable. "Sit down," he said. "Am I being fired?" Layla asked bluntly, unable to bear the suspense any longer. Harold blinked, clearly surprised by the directness of her question. "No," he said slowly. "Quite the opposite, actually." Layla frowned, confusion momentarily overtaking her fear. "What do you mean?" Harold sat down behind his desk, rubbing his temples as if trying to process the strangeness of the situation himself. "Rami Nassar called this morning," he said. "He asked about you specifically. He wanted to know your schedule for the week." "Why?" Layla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He did not say," Harold admitted, "but he made it very clear that he expects you to be treated well here. He said, and I am quoting him directly, that any manager who mistreats an employee with your kind of courage does not deserve to keep their position." Layla sat in stunned silence, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. This was not the outcome she had expected. She had prepared herself for consequences, for punishment, for some quiet but devastating retaliation, delivered through the safety of her workplace. Instead, she was hearing that Rami Nassar had called specifically to ensure her well-being. "I do not understand," she said finally. "Neither do I," Harold admitted, "but when a man like that calls your restaurant personally, you listen very carefully to what he says." Layla left the office that morning with her mind spinning, unable to shake the strange unease that had settled over her, despite the seemingly positive outcome. She had expected fear, she had expected consequences. Instead, she found herself wondering what kind of man Rami Nassar truly was beneath the reputation that preceded him everywhere he went. The days that followed passed in an uneasy quiet. Layla continued her shifts as normal, serving customers, balancing trays, exchanging quiet jokes with Grace, a fellow waitress who had quickly become one of her closest friends at the restaurant. But every time the front door opened, her stomach tightened slightly, half expecting to see Rami Nassar walk through it, though days passed without any sign of him. Then, nearly a week later, he returned. He arrived alone this time, without his usual entourage of men trailing behind him, and instead of heading toward the private back room, he chose a small table near the window, the kind of table typically reserved for regular customers, rather than a man of his reputation and power. Layla noticed him immediately, her breath catching slightly as she watched him settle into the seat, his presence somehow filling the entire section of the restaurant despite his quiet demeanor. Grace nudged her gently, her eyes wide. "Is that him?" Grace whispered. "The man everyone has been talking about?" "Yes," Layla said quietly. "He asked for your section specifically," Grace added, glancing toward the host stand where Daniel stood, watching the exchange with visible tension. Layla took a slow breath, steadying herself before walking toward his table, her notepad held firmly in one hand. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "What can I get for you?" Rami looked up at her, and for a brief moment, something flickered across his face that looked almost like relief, quickly replaced by his usual composed expression. "Just coffee," he said. "Black." Layla nodded, jotting down the order despite how simple it was, mostly to give her hands something to do while her mind worked through the strangeness of the situation. "I heard you spoke to my manager," she said quietly, unable to stop herself from addressing the elephant sitting between them. "I did," Rami confirmed, his eyes steady on hers. "Why?" she asked. "Because I did not want what happened between us to cost you anything," he said simply. "You spoke honestly to me. That deserves protection, not punishment. Layla studied him carefully, searching for the hidden motive she was certain must exist beneath his words. Men like him did not simply protect people out of gratitude. There had to be something else, some deeper calculation she had not yet uncovered. "I do not need your protection," she said finally. Something like amusement flickered behind Rami's eyes. "Everyone needs protection from something, Layla, even people who do not realize it yet." She did not respond to that, choosing instead to retreat to the kitchen to prepare his coffee, her mind racing through the implications of his words. When she returned with the drink, he was staring out the window, his expression distant, lost in thoughts she could not begin to guess at. "Thank you," he said, as she set the cup down in front of him. "You are welcome," she replied, turning to leave. "Layla," he said, stopping her before she could walk away completely. She turned back to face him. "I have not forgotten what you said to me that night," he continued, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. "About cowardice, about mocking people who cannot fight back." Layla remained silent, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I have spent many years being feared," Rami continued. "I built an entire life around ensuring that fear. But you were the first person in a long time who looked at me and saw something other than fear. You saw someone worth challenging." "I saw someone who was wrong," Layla said honestly. "That is all." A faint, almost sad smile crossed Rami's face. "Perhaps that is exactly what I needed to hear," he said quietly. Over the following weeks, Rami began returning to the restaurant with a regularity that neither Layla nor Daniel quite knew how to interpret. He always sat alone, always ordered simple meals, and always requested Layla's section, though he never made demands beyond that. He watched, quietly, carefully, the way she interacted with other customers, the patience she extended toward difficult patrons, the warmth she showed toward regulars who barely tipped, the fairness she carried into every interaction, regardless of who sat across from her. One afternoon, an elderly customer named Mr. Whitfield became irritated over a delayed order, raising his voice slightly and demanding to speak with a manager. Layla remained calm throughout the exchange, apologizing sincerely, offering to remake his meal immediately, treating him with the same patience she extended toward every customer who walked through the door. Rami watched the entire exchange from his table, his coffee growing cold in front of him, his eyes following Layla's every movement with quiet intensity. Later that evening, as she cleared his table, he spoke without looking up from his cup. "You treated that man kindly," he said, "even though he was unfair to you." "Kindness is not something people have to earn," Layla replied simply. "It is something I choose to give, regardless of how others behave." Rami absorbed her words in silence, something shifting behind his expression that Layla could not fully decipher. It was as if each interaction she had with the world around her chipped away slowly at something he had built inside himself over many years, some hardened wall he had constructed to survive in a world built on fear and dominance. Grace, ever perceptive, pulled Layla aside one evening after closing, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "He comes here almost every day now," she said. "Always for you. What is going on between you two?" "Nothing is going on," Layla insisted, though even she was beginning to doubt the certainty of her own words. "Layla," Grace said gently, "men like him do not simply become regulars at ordinary restaurants without a reason. Be careful. Whatever this is, it is not ordinary." Layla knew Grace was right to worry. She knew the reputation Rami carried, the stories whispered about him throughout the city, stories of debts collected without mercy, of business rivals who disappeared from public life entirely, of an empire built on control and quiet intimidation. And yet, every time she watched him sit quietly at his small table near the window, staring into his coffee with an expression that looked almost lonely, she found it increasingly difficult to reconcile that reputation with the man she was slowly beginning to know. One evening, as the restaurant emptied and only Rami remained at his usual table, he asked her a question that caught her completely off guard. "Do you ever get tired of it?" he asked. "Working long hours for so little in return?" Layla considered the question honestly before answering. "Yes," she admitted. "Some days I am exhausted beyond words, but this job allows me to take care of my brother, and that matters more to me than my own exhaustion." "Your brother?" Rami repeated, something in his tone shifting slightly. Tell me about him. Layla hesitated, unsure how much of her personal life she wanted to share with a man whose intentions remained largely mysterious to her. But something about the quiet sincerity in his voice made her lower her guard slightly. His name is Noah, she said. He is younger than me, and he has been dealing with a serious illness for the past 2 years. The medical bills are the reason I work so many shifts. Rami's expression grew unusually solemn, his eyes distant for a moment, as if her words had touched something deeply personal within him. Family is complicated, he said quietly. Sometimes the people we are meant to protect end up being the reason we make choices we never imagined ourselves making. Layla studied him carefully, sensing there was far more beneath his words than he was willing to reveal. What about your family? She asked. A shadow passed across his face, quick and fleeting, gone before she could fully register it. My family is complicated in ways I do not discuss, he said simply, closing the subject before it could open any further. Layla did not push. She sensed instinctively that some doors were not meant to be opened yet, if ever. Instead, she simply nodded, respecting the boundary he had drawn without saying another word about it. As the weeks continued, an unusual rhythm settled between them, an unspoken understanding built on quiet visits, simple conversations, and a mutual curiosity neither of them fully acknowledged out loud. Layla found herself, despite every warning bell ringing in the back of her mind, growing less afraid of the man everyone else in the city trembled before. She did not trust him fully, not yet, but she found herself genuinely curious about the layers hidden beneath his carefully constructed reputation. Outside the restaurant, word of the strange arrangement had begun spreading quietly through the neighborhood, the way small pieces of gossip always found their way from one shopkeeper to another, from one bus stop conversation to the next. Layla noticed it first in small ways, the baker on the corner who suddenly greeted her by name every morning, the pharmacist who lowered the price of Noah's medication without explanation, the elderly woman who ran the flower stall near the bus stop who began pressing a small bundle of jasmine into her hands each week, refusing payment. People are being kind to me, Layla told Grace one afternoon, puzzled by the sudden shift. More than usual. I do not understand why. Grace gave her a look that was somewhere between amusement and concern. Layla, everyone in this neighborhood knows who has been coming to see you every day. People are not being kind to you because they suddenly love your smile. They are being careful because they think you might matter to someone who could make their lives very difficult if you were treated poorly. The realization settled uncomfortably in Layla's chest. She had not asked for this kind of attention, had never wanted her life measured against the shadow of Rami's reputation. That is not fair, she said quietly. I do not want people treating me well out of fear of him. I know, Grace said gently. But that is the world he lives in, Layla. Even his silence changes how people behave. Layla thought about that conversation for days afterward, turning it over in her mind during quiet moments at home, while Noah did his schoolwork at the kitchen table. She did not want to become someone defined by another person's power, someone whose worth in the eyes of strangers depended entirely on whom she was seen sitting across from at a small corner table. She raised the subject with Rami directly one evening, unable to keep the frustration entirely out of her voice. People are treating me differently because of you, she said. The shopkeepers, the neighbors, they are being careful around me now, not because they respect me, but because they are afraid of what might happen if they do not. Rami considered her words seriously, setting down his cup before responding. I did not ask anyone to treat you that way, he said, but I understand why it happens. My name carries weight in this city, weight I built over many years, much of it through methods I am not proud of. I cannot undo the fear people feel, simply because I wish it were different. Then what am I supposed to do with that? Layla asked. Accept kindness I did not earn, built on fear I did not ask for? You do not have to accept anything you are not comfortable with, Rami said. But perhaps, over time, you can show people that your worth was never tied to my name in the first place. That takes patience, Layla. It cannot be solved in a single conversation. Layla considered his words carefully, recognizing the truth in them, even as frustration lingered beneath her thoughts. She resolved, quietly, to continue treating everyone around her, exactly as she always had, regardless of how they now treated her, refusing to let fear reshape the kind of person she wanted to be. Little did she know that this quiet, uneasy friendship was about to be tested in ways neither of them could yet anticipate, as forces beyond the restaurant's walls began to take notice of the unusual attention Rami Nassar had been paying to an ordinary waitress who had once dared to call him a coward to his face. A man named Victor stood outside the restaurant one rainy evening, waiting near his car with his collar turned up against the wind. He had worked for Rami Nassar for nearly 8 years, long enough to know when something about his boss had changed. And something had changed. Ever since the night that waitress had spoken back to him, Rami had grown quieter, more distracted, spending hours away from the business, in ways that unsettled the careful balance of power surrounding him. Victor was not the only one who noticed. There was another man in Rami's world, a rival with ambitions of his own, a man named Adrian Cole who had spent years waiting patiently for any sign of weakness in Rami's carefully guarded empire. Adrian had built his own network slowly, quietly, always watching from the shadows for the right opportunity to expand his influence. And when whispers began circulating about Rami's strange fixation on an ordinary waitress, Adrian saw an opening he had been waiting years to find. He did not act immediately. Men like Adrian understood patience better than most. Instead, he began gathering information quietly, sending people to watch the restaurant, to learn Layla's schedule, her routines, the small details of her life that could later be used as leverage if the situation called for it. Layla remained completely unaware of the storm quietly gathering around her. Her days continued much as they always had, filled with long shifts, quiet moments with Noah in the evenings, and the increasingly familiar presence of Rami, sitting at his usual table near the window. She had grown accustomed to his visits, had even, if she was honest with herself, begun to look forward to their brief conversations, though she remained cautious about trusting him fully. One evening, as she left the restaurant after a particularly long shift, she noticed a car parked across the street that she did not recognize, its engine running quietly, despite the late hour. She paused for a moment, an uneasy feeling settling over her, before dismissing it as nothing more than her own tired imagination and continuing toward the bus stop. The following day, however, the same car appeared again, this time parked closer to her apartment building. Layla's unease deepened, though she said nothing to anyone, unsure whether she was simply being paranoid or whether something genuinely concerning was unfolding around her. That evening, Rami arrived at the restaurant later than usual, his expression tighter than she had ever seen it before. He sat at his table without ordering anything, his eyes scanning the restaurant with unusual intensity. "Is something wrong?" Layla asked as she approached his table. "Sit down for a moment," he said quietly. Layla hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen where Daniel was watching with visible concern, before finally lowering herself into the seat across from him. "There are people watching you," Rami said without preamble. Layla's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "There is a man named Adrian Cole," Rami continued, his voice low and controlled, though she could sense the tension simmering beneath his composed exterior. "He has been building influence in this city for years, waiting for an opportunity to challenge my position. He has noticed my visits here. He has noticed you." "Why would he care about me?" Layla asked, her voice trembling slightly, despite her effort to remain calm. "Because he understands that you matter to me," Rami said quietly. "And in this world, anything that matters to someone can be used against them." Layla felt a cold wave of fear settle over her, thoughts of Noah flashing immediately through her mind. "What does that mean for my brother? For me?" "It means you need to be careful," Rami said. "More careful than you have ever had to be before. This is exactly why I did not want anything to do with your world," Layla said, her voice sharper now, fear giving way to frustration. "I did not ask for this. I did not ask to be dragged into whatever conflict exists between you and this man." "You are right," Rami admitted, something like guilt flickering across his expression. "You did not ask for any of this, and I am sorry that my presence here has put you at risk." Layla studied him carefully, searching for any trace of the arrogance she remembered from their first encounter. She found none. Instead, she saw genuine concern, a heaviness in his eyes that suggested he understood exactly how serious the situation had become. "What do we do?" she asked finally. "I will handle Adrian," Rami said, "but I need you to trust me for a little while. I need you to let me protect you and your brother, even if it means accepting help you would rather not need." Layla hesitated, torn between her instinct to refuse help from a man whose world she barely understood, and the growing fear for Noah's safety that overshadowed every other consideration. "I do not like this," she said finally. "I do not like feeling like I have no control over what happens to my own life." "I understand," Rami said. "But right now, staying safe matters more than staying independent. We can discuss control once this danger has passed." That night, as Layla walked home from the bus stop, she noticed two men standing at a respectful distance from her building, quiet and watchful, clearly stationed there, without drawing attention to themselves. She recognized one of them as Victor, the man she had seen accompanying Rami during their first encounter. She said nothing, choosing instead to walk quickly toward her building, her mind racing with the reality of the situation she now found herself in. Whatever strange, unlikely friendship had formed between her and Rami Nassar, it had clearly become something far larger than either of them had anticipated. Over the following days, the tension in the city seemed to sharpen, though Layla only caught glimpses of it through quiet, cautious conversations with Rami during his visits. Adrian Cole, she learned, had begun making moves against several of Rami's business associates, testing the boundaries of his rival's patience, probing for weaknesses he could exploit. "He wants me distracted," Rami explained one evening, his voice low as he sat across from her during a quiet moment near closing time. "He believes that if he can pull my attention toward protecting you, he can strike elsewhere while I am unprepared." "Then maybe you should stop protecting me," Layla said quietly. "Maybe that would solve his problem and keep everyone safer." "No," Rami said firmly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that surprised her. "I will not use your safety as a bargaining chip in this conflict. That is exactly the kind of thinking Adrian relies on. I refuse to become the kind of man who sacrifices someone's safety just to maintain control." Layla studied him carefully, noticing something different in the way he spoke now compared to the man she had first encountered weeks earlier. There was a weight to his words now, a sense of responsibility that had not existed in the arrogant, careless man who had once mocked her, in a language he assumed she could not understand. "You have changed," she said quietly. Rami looked away for a moment, considering her words carefully before responding. "Perhaps I have simply started paying attention to things I ignored before," he said. "You showed me something that night, Layla. You showed me that strength built on fear is fragile, easily shattered by a single moment of honesty. I have spent years building an empire on fear, and it took one waitress calling me a coward to make me realize how hollow that foundation truly is." Layla did not know how to respond to that, the weight of his words settling over her in a way she had not expected. She had spoken those words weeks earlier, out of frustration, out of a refusal to accept mockery she did not deserve. She had never imagined they would linger in his mind so deeply, reshaping the way he viewed his own life and choices. The following week, the tension escalated further when Noah came home from school, looking pale and frightened, clutching his backpack tightly to his chest. "What happened?" Layla asked immediately, kneeling down to check on him. "A man talked to me," Noah said, his voice shaking slightly. "He said he knew you. He said to tell you that Adrian says hello." Layla's blood ran cold. She held her brother close, her mind racing through the implications of what he had just told her. Adrian Cole had crossed a line she had not anticipated, involving her younger brother directly in a conflict that had nothing to do with him. She called Rami immediately, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury and fear. "He approached Noah," she said the moment he answered. "He spoke to my brother." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, followed by a tone in Rami's voice she had never heard before, cold and controlled, in a way that reminded her, uncomfortably, of the reputation she had almost forgotten belonged to him. "He will not touch your brother again," Rami said. "I promise you that." "How can you promise that?" Layla asked, fear giving way to anger. "You said you would handle this. Instead, my brother is being threatened." "I am handling it," Rami said firmly. "But Adrian has made a mistake tonight. He has shown me exactly how far he is willing to go, and that changes everything. Layla did not fully understand what he meant by that, but something in his tone told her that whatever quiet, careful conflict had been simmering beneath the surface of the city was about to shift into something far more serious. That night, she stayed awake long after Noah had finally fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling, her mind cycling through fear, anger, and a strange, unexpected gratitude toward the man she had once called a coward, without hesitation. She did not know what the coming days would bring, but she understood, with a clarity that unsettled her deeply, that there was no turning back from the path she now found herself walking. The next morning, before her shift began, Layla sat with Grace in the small break room behind the kitchen, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea she had not yet touched. She had not planned to say anything, had told herself she would carry the fear quietly, the way she always tried to carry difficult things, but the exhaustion of the past several days finally broke through her composure. "Someone spoke to Noah yesterday," she said quietly. "A stranger. He mentioned Rami's rival by name." Grace's face drained of color. "Layla, that is serious. That is very serious." "I know," Layla said, her voice trembling slightly for the first time since the whole ordeal had begun. "I have been so careful. I walk him to school, I wait outside until the doors close, and still, someone got close enough to speak to him." Grace reached across the small table and took her hand firmly. "You need to tell someone, the school at least. Have them keep an extra eye on him during the day." "I already spoke to his teacher this morning," Layla said. "She promised to watch for anyone unfamiliar near the gates." "And Rami?" Grace asked carefully. "Is he actually protecting you? Or is he the reason you need protecting in the first place?" The question hung heavily in the small room, and Layla did not have an easy answer for it. "I do not know anymore," she admitted. "Every day I tell myself I should walk away from this, stop answering his calls, stop letting him sit in my section. And every day, something happens that reminds me how much worse things could become without him standing between us and whatever is coming." "That sounds like a very dangerous kind of trust to build your life around," Grace said gently. "I know," Layla said. "But right now, it is the only kind of trust I have." Grace squeezed her hand once more before releasing it, her expression softening. "Whatever happens, you are not facing this alone. You know that, right?" "I know," Layla said, managing a small, grateful smile, despite the weight pressing down on her chest. "Thank you for that." She finished her tea in silence after Grace returned to the floor, gathering herself for another shift, another evening of watching the door a little too closely, another night of falling asleep with her phone resting beside her pillow in case Rami needed to reach her quickly. The rhythm of ordinary life had not disappeared entirely, but it had grown a shadow now, one that followed her through every quiet moment of her day. Whatever Rami Nassar had once been, whatever reputation had followed him through the shadows of this city, she had become undeniably tied to his world now, whether she had chosen it or not. And as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, she found herself hoping, against every rational instinct telling her otherwise, that the man who had once mocked her in a language he assumed she could not understand would prove strong enough and good enough to protect the only family she had left. 3 days passed after the incident with Noah, and during that time, Layla barely left her apartment except for her scheduled shifts at the restaurant. She walked her brother to school personally each morning, waited outside until the doors closed behind him, and returned promptly each afternoon to walk him home again. Fear had become a constant companion, quiet but ever present, shadowing every decision she made. Rami visited the restaurant each day during this period, though his usual calm demeanor had shifted into something sharper, more focused. He spoke less during these visits, his attention seemingly divided between the conversation at hand and something happening beyond the restaurant walls that Layla could only guess at. "Is it over?" she asked one evening, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer. "Is Adrian going to leave my brother alone?" Rami set down his cup slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a seriousness that made her chest tighten. "I need to test something," he said. "Something that will determine how far I can trust the people around me, including you." Layla frowned, confusion mixing with a fresh wave of unease. "Test what exactly?" "Adrian did not simply approach your brother randomly," Rami explained. Someone gave him information about your schedule, your routines, details that only a small circle of people would know. I need to find out who that person is before I can guarantee your safety completely. You think someone close to you betrayed your trust? Layla asked. I think it is possible, Rami admitted, and I need your help to find out. Layla's stomach twisted uncomfortably. What do you need me to do? I want to offer you money, Rami said, watching her reaction carefully. A significant amount, in exchange for your silence about everything that has happened between us, and your agreement to stop asking questions about my business. If you accept, it will tell me something important about the situation. If you refuse, it will tell me something else entirely. Layla stared at him, a mixture of confusion and hurt washing over her. You are testing me, she said slowly, understanding dawning in her voice. After everything, you still do not trust me. It is not about trust in the way you think, Rami said quickly. It is about understanding whether the courage you showed me that first night was genuine, or whether it was simply a moment of frustration that could be bought away with enough money. Layla felt anger rising within her, sharp and immediate. I did not ask for your protection, she said, her voice tightening. I did not ask to be pulled into your world, and I certainly did not ask to be tested like some kind of experiment. I know, Rami said quietly, and I am sorry for putting you through this. But I need to understand who I am dealing with, both around me and within myself. Layla stood up from the table, her hands trembling slightly, with barely restrained frustration. Keep your money, she said firmly. I did not speak the truth to you that night, because I wanted something from you. I spoke it because it was right. Money does not change what is right or wrong, and it certainly will not buy my silence about anything. She turned to walk away, but Rami's voice stopped her before she had taken more than a few steps. Layla, he said quietly. She turned back, her eyes still burning with frustration. Thank you, he said simply. For what? She asked, confusion cutting through her anger. For proving that some things in this world still cannot be bought, he said. I needed to know that, especially now. Layla studied him for a long moment, understanding slowly settling over her frustration. Was this really about finding a traitor? She asked. Or was it about something else entirely? Rami hesitated before answering, something vulnerable flickering across his usually composed expression. Both perhaps, he admitted. I have spent so many years surrounded by people who could be bought, people whose loyalty existed only as long as the money kept flowing. I forgot what it looked like when someone refused for reasons beyond profit. I am not like the people you usually surround yourself with, Layla said quietly. No, Rami agreed. You are not. And that is exactly why Adrian sees you as a weakness to exploit, rather than someone who could actually help me become stronger. Layla sat back down slowly, her anger softening into something more contemplative. What happens now? She asked. Now I know who to look at more carefully, Rami said. There are only a handful of people who knew enough details about your life to pass that information to Adrian. I intend to find out exactly who that is. Over the following days, a quiet, careful investigation unfolded beneath the surface of the city, one that Layla only glimpsed through brief updates from Rami during his visits. She learned that Victor, despite his rough exterior, had remained fiercely loyal throughout the years, quickly ruled out as a suspect. Instead, suspicion settled on a quieter member of Rami's inner circle, a man who had grown resentful over years of being overlooked for greater responsibility within the organization. Rami had not expected the investigation to move as quickly as it did. Within 2 days, small inconsistencies began surfacing in the stories his associates gave when asked casually about their recent movements, their contacts, their conversations outside the organization. Victor, tasked with quietly cross-checking schedules and phone records, brought the first real piece of evidence to Rami late one night, his expression grim as he laid a folder on the desk between them. It points to someone close, Victor said. Someone who had access to details about the waitress and her brother that only a handful of people should have known. Rami studied the folder in silence for a long moment, a heaviness settling over him that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with disappointment. He had built relationships with the men in his organization over many years, had trusted some of them with responsibilities far beyond simple loyalty. The idea that one of them had quietly handed information to Adrian, information that had ultimately reached his ears through the mouth of a stranger threatening a child, felt like a betrayal deeper than any business rivalry could explain. When the truth finally surfaced, it arrived not through violence, but through a quiet confrontation that Rami described to Layla afterward, with visible relief evident in his voice. He confessed, Rami said one evening, sitting across from her at his usual table. He believed that helping Adrian would earn him a better position in a new hierarchy, one where his loyalty would finally be recognized and rewarded. What happens to him now? Layla asked, unsure whether she truly wanted to know the answer. He will no longer be part of my organization, Rami said simply, his tone leaving little room for further questions. But your brother is safe now. Adrian no longer has access to the information he needs to threaten you. Relief flooded through Layla so intensely that she felt her eyes sting with unexpected emotion. Thank you, she said quietly. You do not need to thank me, Rami said. This situation only existed because of my world intersecting with yours. Protecting you and your brother was the least I could do. Layla studied him carefully, noticing the way his shoulders seemed to carry a heaviness that had not been there when she first met him. You seem tired, she said gently. I am tired, Rami admitted, surprising her with his honesty. Tired of a life built entirely on suspicion and fear. Tired of wondering who around me can truly be trusted. You have no idea how rare it is to meet someone whose honesty does not come with hidden motives. Everyone has motives, Layla said quietly. Mine is simple though. I want to take care of my brother, and I want to be treated fairly by the people around me. That is all. It is more than most people want, Rami said. Most people I encounter want power, money, position. You want stability and fairness. It is strange how rare that simplicity has become in my world. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the restaurant slowly emptying around them as the evening wound down. Layla found herself studying Rami's face carefully, searching for traces of the arrogant, mocking man she had first encountered weeks earlier. She found very little of that man remaining, replaced instead by someone quieter, more reflective, someone clearly wrestling with questions about the life he had built for himself. Can I ask you something? Layla said finally. Of course, Rami replied. Why did you really start coming back here? She asked. After that first night, you could have simply forgotten about the encounter entirely. Instead, you kept returning, kept talking to me, kept involving yourself in protecting me and my brother. Why? Rami considered the question for a long moment before answering, his eyes distant, as if searching for words that had been forming slowly over the past several weeks. Because you reminded me of something I had forgotten, he said finally. That respect earned through honesty means far more than respect enforced through fear. I built my entire life around fear, Layla. Every relationship, every business deal, every interaction has been built on people being too afraid to challenge me. You were the first person in years who challenged me anyway, despite that fear. And that changed something in you? Layla asked. It made me question everything, Rami admitted. The kind of man I have become, the kind of life I have built, the kind of legacy I am creating for myself. I do not know yet what to do with those questions, but I know I cannot simply ignore them anymore. Layla listened carefully, sensing the genuine vulnerability behind his words, a vulnerability she doubted many people ever witnessed from a man of his reputation. She did not fully trust him, not completely, not yet, but she found herself believing, more and more with each passing conversation, that the man sitting across from her was genuinely wrestling with becoming someone different than the reputation that preceded him through the city's shadows. Change is difficult, she said quietly, especially when an entire empire depends on you staying exactly the way you have always been. Yes, Rami agreed. It is very difficult, but perhaps difficult does not mean impossible. As the night drew to a close and Layla prepared to leave for home, Rami walked her to the door, an unusual gesture that did not go unnoticed by Grace, who watched from behind the counter with a knowing, curious expression. Be careful going home, Rami said as they stood near the entrance. Even though Adrian's immediate threat has been handled, the tension between us has not fully disappeared. There may still be consequences neither of us can fully predict yet. I understand, Layla said. Thank you for everything you have done to protect Noah and me. Rami nodded, his expression unusually gentle in that moment. Take care of yourself, Layla, he said quietly. And take care of your brother. Whatever happens next in this conflict, I intend to make sure neither of you pays the price for my mistakes. Layla walked home that night with a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty settling over her, aware that the danger surrounding her life had not fully passed, but comforted, in a way she still did not entirely trust, by the quiet, unwavering protection of a man she had once called a coward without hesitation. She did not yet know that the true test of everything building between them was still waiting on the horizon, one final confrontation that would determine not just her own safety, but the entire direction of the man Rami Nassar was slowly, painfully choosing to become. 2 weeks passed with a fragile, uneasy calm settling over Layla's life. Noah returned to his normal routine, his fear slowly fading as the days passed without further incident. Layla continued her shifts at the restaurant, and Rami continued his visits, though the tension between them had softened into something closer to genuine friendship. Built on the strange, unlikely foundation of honesty neither of them had expected to find in the other. Then, one afternoon, everything shifted again. Layla arrived home from her shift to find an unfamiliar envelope waiting outside her apartment door, her name written across the front in neat, careful handwriting. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up, memories of Adrian's earlier threat flashing immediately through her mind. Inside, she found a letter along with a folder of documents, medical records specifically related to Noah's ongoing treatment. She scanned through the papers with growing confusion, recognizing details about specialists, treatment plans, and financial arrangements she had never personally organized. She called Rami immediately, her voice tight with confusion. "Did you do this?" she asked without preamble. There was a brief pause on the line before he answered. "I arranged for Noah to see a specialist," he admitted. "One of the best in the region. The costs have already been covered." "Why would you do that without telling me first?" Layla asked, torn between gratitude and frustration at the unexpected intrusion into her private life. "Because I did not want you to refuse before understanding how much it could help him," Rami said honestly. "I know you value your independence, Layla. But your brother's health matters more than either of our pride." Layla sat down slowly, overwhelmed by the weight of his gesture. "This is too much," she said quietly. "I cannot accept something this significant." "You do not have to accept it as a debt," Rami said. "Think of it as something given freely, without expectation of anything in return." "Nothing in your world comes without expectation," Layla said, though her voice had softened considerably. "Perhaps that is exactly what I am trying to change," Rami replied quietly. "Starting with you and your brother." Over the following weeks, Noah's health began improving steadily under the care of the specialist Rami had arranged, color returning to his cheeks, energy returning to his laughter, in a way that brought tears to Layla's eyes more than once during quiet evenings at home. She still carried a careful wariness about accepting help from a man whose world remained so deeply entangled with danger, but she could not deny the genuine relief flooding through her each time she watched her brother grow stronger. Rami's visits to the restaurant continued, though something had shifted subtly in the atmosphere surrounding him. Word had begun spreading quietly through certain circles of the city that Rami Nassar had changed, that his decisions had grown more measured, more thoughtful, less driven by the ruthless reputation that had defined him for years. Some of his associates grumbled quietly about the shift, uncertain what it meant for the future of the organization they depended on. Others, like Victor, watched with quiet curiosity, sensing something meaningful unfolding before them, even if they did not fully understand it yet. One evening, as the restaurant prepared to close for the night, Rami lingered at his table longer than usual, watching Layla move gracefully between the remaining tables, refilling water glasses, exchanging warm farewells with departing customers. "Can I ask you something?" he said as she approached to clear his table. "Of course," Layla replied. "Do you think it is possible for someone to truly change?" he asked. "Not just adjust their behavior temporarily, but fundamentally change who they are at their core?" Layla considered the question carefully before answering, sensing the deeper meaning behind his words. "I think people can change," she said, "but only if they genuinely want to, and only if they are willing to face the difficult parts of themselves they have been avoiding. And if someone has spent years building a life around fear and control, Rami continued, do you think there is still a path back from that, towards something better? I think the fact that you are asking the question at all means the path already exists, Layla said gently. People who have completely lost themselves rarely stop to wonder if change is still possible. Rami absorbed her words quietly, his expression thoughtful, almost peaceful in a way she had never witnessed from him before. I have been thinking about stepping back, he admitted finally. Not entirely away from my responsibilities, but toward a version of leadership built on something other than fear. I do not know exactly what that looks like yet, or whether the people around me will accept such a change. Change rarely happens overnight, Layla said. But every choice you make towards something better matters, even if the full transformation takes time. Rami smiled faintly, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his usually composed features into something softer, more human. You know, he said, that night you called me a coward, I nearly had you removed from this restaurant entirely. I nearly let my pride destroy the one honest conversation I had encountered in years. What stopped you? Layla asked, genuinely curious. Something in your eyes, Rami said. You were afraid, I could see that clearly, but you spoke the truth anyway, despite that fear. I had forgotten what real courage looked like until that moment. Layla felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, though she remained careful not to let herself become fully swept away by the sentiment. Trust, especially trust built on the foundation of everything she had learned about Rami's world, took time to solidify fully. Thank you for telling me that, she said quietly. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, carefully, an unlikely partnership continued to grow between them, built not on the fear that defined most of Rami's relationships, but on mutual respect and honesty that neither of them had expected to find in the other. Rami began making quieter changes within his organization, shifting away from tactics built purely on intimidation, focusing instead on business practices that, while still operating within a world Layla did not fully understand or approve of, carried far less collateral damage toward innocent people caught in its wake. Noah continued to grow stronger, his health improving steadily with each passing month, his laughter filling their small apartment with a warmth that had been missing for far too long. Layla continued working at the restaurant, her friendship with Grace deepening, her confidence growing, as she navigated a life that had become far more complicated, yet somehow also more meaningful than she could have imagined just months earlier. One evening, nearly 6 months after their first encounter, Rami arrived at the restaurant, carrying a small, wrapped package, an unusual gesture that immediately caught Layla's attention as she approached his table. What is this? She asked, eyeing the package curiously. A small token, Rami said, sliding it across the table toward her. Nothing extravagant, just something to thank you. Thank me for what? Layla asked, carefully unwrapping the package to reveal a beautifully bound journal, simple yet elegant in its design. For reminding me what it means to be honest, Rami said, for showing me that strength does not require fear, and that respect earned through integrity means far more than respect enforced through intimidation. You changed something in me, Layla, something I did not even realize needed changing until you challenged me that first night. Layla ran her fingers gently across the journal's cover, touched deeply by the simplicity and sincerity of the gift. I did not set out to change anyone, she said quietly. I only spoke the truth because it was right. And that is exactly why it mattered so much, Rami said. The most meaningful changes rarely come from grand gestures. They come from small, honest moments that quietly reshape everything afterward. Layla smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reflected the journey both of them had traveled since that tense, uncertain night months earlier. She thought of how frightened she had been that evening, how certain she had felt that speaking honestly would cost her everything she had worked so hard to build. Instead, that single moment of courage had led to an unlikely friendship, a transformed understanding of strength and respect, and a path toward healing for her brother that she could never have imagined finding on her own. Thank you, Rami, she said sincerely, not just for this gift, but for proving that people truly can change, even when the world around them expects otherwise. Rami nodded, his eyes carrying a warmth and peace that had been entirely absent during their first tense encounter. "Thank you, Layla," he replied quietly, "for teaching me that courage and honesty will always outlast fear, no matter how powerful that fear may seem." As the evening drew to a close and the restaurant settled into its familiar quiet rhythm, Layla found herself reflecting on how far both of their lives had traveled since that single defiant moment when she refused to let mockery go unanswered. She had not set out to change a dangerous man's entire outlook on life. She had simply refused to stay silent in the face of disrespect. And in doing so, she had discovered that sometimes the smallest acts of courage carry the power to reshape not just one life, but many, rippling outward in ways neither the person speaking the truth nor the person hearing it could ever have fully anticipated. A few weeks after receiving the journal, Layla brought Noah to the restaurant for the first time, curious to see how her brother would react to finally meeting the man who had quietly changed the course of his treatment without ever asking for recognition. Noah sat quietly at first, studying Rami with the cautious curiosity of a child who had learned, through frightening experience, that strangers connected to his sister's world were not always safe. "You are the man who helped me see the new doctor," Noah said finally, his voice small but steady. "I am," Rami said, meeting the boy's gaze with a gentleness that surprised Layla each time she witnessed it. "Why did you help me?" Noah asked. "You do not even know me." Rami considered the question carefully, the way he considered most things now, weighing his words before speaking them aloud. "Because your sister showed me something important once," he said. "She showed me that treating people with fairness matters more than power ever could. Helping you felt like the right way to honor that lesson." Noah studied him for a long moment before a small, tentative smile finally broke across his face. "Layla says you used to be scary," he said bluntly, the way only children could manage. Rami let out a genuine laugh, one of the few times Layla had heard him laugh so freely. "I suppose I was," he admitted. "But your sister taught me that being scary is not the same as being strong." Layla watched the exchange with a warmth spreading through her chest. The fear that had once defined so much of her relationship with Rami, now replaced by something steadier, something she was slowly, cautiously beginning to trust. Noah's laughter, once a distant memory during the darkest months of his illness, now filled the small restaurant table, mixing easily with the quiet hum of evening conversations around them. The city outside continued its restless, complicated rhythm, indifferent to the quiet transformation unfolding within the walls of one small restaurant. But for Layla and Rami, and for Noah, whose laughter now filled their home once more, something meaningful had taken root that night months earlier, a reminder that even in a world built on fear and power, honesty and courage still held the power to change everything.